Life is short. Buy more records. That's been the motto of Permanent Records since 2006, since we first opened our store in Chicago. Fast forward 17 years later, and here we are in LA, and we have a live music venue, a bar, and a record store that's open from noon until midnight, Wednesday through Sunday, where you can buy, sell, and trade vinyl records, have an alcoholic beverage or non-alcoholic beverage if you so choose, catch a show, catch a comedy show, and hang with your friends and just talk about music and everything record related. My name's Lance, I'm the owner of Permanent Records, and I'm back with the second part of a two-part video showcasing some of the records we bought on our most recent European record buying trip. We buy big collections of records all the time. Well, we buy all sorts of record collections, big, small, and otherwise. And we also travel around the world to buy records for our shop. And I'm here to show you just some of the most recent acquisitions. So without further ado, let's get into the vinyl. On this most recent trip, we bought, as I mentioned in the first video, a bunch of Italo disco, like that hot cold 12-inch there. Compilations of Italo disco, like this Italo boot mix. And lots and lots and lots of krautrock and prog, like this Jane record on the quintessential Brain label. If you've never heard this Jane record, it might be my favorite of theirs. It's a great kind of glammy, almost Bowie-esque kind of vibe. I highly recommend checking out Jane. They have a lot of records. They're all fairly good. That last one I just showed, Between Heaven and Hell, I believe is the title of it. That is, I think, my favorite Jane record. But this one, here we are. Also really good. Also on Brain Records. You almost can't go wrong getting anything on Brain. Kano is another Italo disco artist. That was the LP. This is a 12-inch single of Another Life. Here's another copy of Another Life for all you Italo disco DJs out there. Speaking of Italo, we got this Kodo 12-inch. And we can't have a video about European records or krautrock at all without mentioning one of the most quintessential krautrock bands that has ever existed, Kraftwerk. Here's a copy of their classic Autobahn album, the breakthrough hit Autobahn. This is the Man Machine, but this is the German language version of it, called the Mensch Machine, of course. And yeah, another classic Kraftwerk album. I assume most of you out there are familiar with Kraftwerk, so I won't get into all that. Not specifically, but Kraftwerk is kind of the beginning of krautrock. Way back in the late 60s, Kraftwerk formed as a four-piece with a live drummer, a guitar player, and Ralph and Florian on synthesizers and flute. And the first two albums, the ones with the pylons, the orange and green pylons on the cover, are the most experimental Kraftwerk albums. Those are way different. They have a way different vibe than the later Kraftwerk that was more electronic dance music. But it's really interesting, and it's interesting in the history of krautrock in general and the progression of it. Not only did Kraftwerk, as we know it, come out of that with Ralph and Florian moving on into just all pre-programmed drums and electronic instruments. Multiple artists came out of that original formation of Kraftwerk. You had Klaus Dinger and Michael Rother, or Michael Rother, if you will. They formed Neu. After Neu split up, Klaus Dinger, the drummer in Neu, he formed La Düsseldorf. La Düsseldorf did 3 albums, self-titled album Düsseldorf, Viva, and one other one called Individuelos, which I will get to here shortly. And we bought copies of all 3 of those records, multiple copies, as you can see. And if you like Neu, you have to check out La Düsseldorf. These records are fantastic. Very similar to Neu, almost like a more accessible, more palatable Neu, more like new wavy German new wave style krautrock. So anyway, that's that. More on that in just a moment. Lemming, this is a band that you can find their singles fairly readily in Europe. This LP is actually pretty hard to come by. This is kind of a hard rock, glammy kind of band from the Netherlands, and their records are fantastic, and I highly recommend checking that one out. Told you we'd be back to Neu here shortly. This is a US copy on Billingsgate of the first Neu record, and then we also have the German pressing on Brain of the first Neu record, and then we also have Neu 75. Unfortunately, we did not find a copy of Neu 2 in this particular trip, but if you like, if you like krautrock, you're already familiar with Neu, but if you're looking to get into krautrock, the first Neu record is a great place to start. It's fairly experimental, but it has a lot of the same elements that you'll find in all the classic krautrock records. Motoric beats, just kind of soaring guitar solos, and all sorts of experimentation, of course. Magma, as you know, French prog band, one of the best, one of the most iconic band logos from that era. Looks like Geiger artwork on Attack. That's a really great prog record if you've never heard it. This is a compilation on Pink Elephant, which is a Dutch label. This includes Shocking Blue, of course, but also has the lesser known Geronimo, a really great Dutch band that I highly recommend checking out. I have Geronimo singles in my personal collection. That particular comp's called Never Marry a Pink Elephant. Here's a RAF Italo disco single. A little more Italo in the mix. This one's Pink Project. More Pink Project. This is a double LP. And then every once in a while we get lucky and we find Vertigo records in Europe. You can find these here in the States, maybe not so much as you can in the UK and in Europe, but this is Ramasis. This album's called Space Hymns. This is a really fantastic psychedelic space rock album, again, on the Vertigo label. Another thing we try to buy a lot of while we're overseas is German New Wave, and you can do no better as far as NDW or German New Wave is concerned than Rheingold. This is a classic example of the genre. The single off of this, Fanatisch, pardon me, German is not my strong suit. I shouldn't have slept through so many German classes in high school, but the teacher let me do it. You know, it's just, why? Come on, teachers, don't let kids sleep through class. This record and the follow-up are amazing albums. These are basically German New Wave, very heavily influenced by the krautrock that came before them. And I love buying these records overseas, bringing them back and playing them for people who've never heard them in the shop. People are almost always knocked out by them. Does it get any more cold wave than this album cover? I think not. And that is what this album is. It is an amazing example of cold wave, minimal synth, electronic music. And we do our best to find at least a few of these when we go overseas, and we lucked out this time. But I will warn you, do not mistake Wunderbar for this Wolfgang Reichmann and Streetmark album. This is a completely different album with Wolfgang Reichmann playing with Streetmark, and this is a way more proggy album. It is cool as hell. I highly recommend checking this out, but it is not the minimal synth masterpiece that Wunderbar is. And it took me a while to realize that. I just assumed this was a later pressing of the Wunderbar album at first, and then I dropped the needle on this and I was like, that's a different album altogether. Both are worth listening to. Here's an oddball soundtrack we got overseas. This is an Omega record. Omega are a Hungarian, or were a Hungarian rock band. This band did albums from the mid 60s into the 80s. At some point during the pandemic, when Tara and I were packing up mail order, we listened to the entire Omega discography, and I knew I liked a lot of the albums, and I was stunned to find that I like almost all of them. Again, if you're not familiar with the Hungarian band Omega, 10,000 Lepes is where I would start. This is a later, that's from 68 or 69. This is a later album by them, probably 73 or so, but definitely worth checking out. And Omega in general, their catalog, one of the best Hungarian bands of all time. Palais Schaumburg, this is a killer post-punk album. Dark, new wavy post-punk, really, really catchy stuff. Slightly experimental, little Joy Division kind of vibe. Really, really good stuff. They were a German band. This compilation is called, Picture Music. This is instrumental electronic music. Obviously, you can see on the back there, it's got Michael Rother, it's got Rodelius, it's got Cluster, it's got Reichman, Street Mark, which we just talked about, and this is another one of those gateway drugs into krautrock. We spoke recently about Corporal Ganders, and we also spoke about the Electric Food album. Well, Pink Mice, this is another library type album where the guys from Lucifer's Friend went into the studio, recorded under a different name. This one, a little more on the electronic tip. Or maybe not this one, but this one certainly has more synthesizers on it. Both Pink Mice albums, really, really cool. Highly recommended stuff. Oh, here's another copy of that Picture Music album we just talked about. And then here is volume 3 of the same series. Again, on the classic Sky record label. I'll pull that out so you can see what it looks like if you're not already familiar. Highly recommend digging deep into the Sky catalog. There are very few Sky releases that I would not recommend. Richard Pinas, aka Helden, experimental prog stuff. He was French, I believe, and also recorded under the name Schizo. There are 2 Schizo 45s. Both are really far out and highly recommended. I have both of them in my personal collection, and his whole catalog is worth listening to. Italo Disco. These 3 are the LP by Ruggiera. Forgive me, I told you I'm not the expert in Italo Disco. Talk to Tara about that. All right, like I said, Kraftwerk. It's where it all began. Michael Rother, if we're speaking with a German accent, was a founding member of Kraftwerk. He's a guitar player in Neu. He, after Neu split up, he was also in Harmonia, and after Neu split up, he went on to an illustrious solo career and released, I want to say a ton of albums, and they're all really good. This is the second one, Stern Taylor. We got a bunch of copies of this. We got a bunch of copies of his first one, which I'll get to here in a minute. His later ones are harder to come by and not quite as good, in my opinion, as these are, these earlier ones. But if you like the idea of Neu, but Neu goes a little too far out for you, check out Michael Rother's solo stuff. It's absolutely amazing, and it happens to be what's playing in the background now. You basically get all the elements of Neu in a sweeter package with a little less experimentation, all the motoric beats, all the soaring guitar solos, all of the just soothing instrumental goodness This is Katzenmusik. That means music for cats in German. And we got a bunch of copies of that one. That's also on the Sky label, as most of these are. And even though this one maybe doesn't look like it would be good, it is. I highly recommend checking this one out. The album art is questionable, but the music is not. Fern Varma, we only got one of those on this trip, and we only have a few copies of Flaminda Herzen, his first solo album. But you gotta check this one out. It's what we've been listening to in the background. It's fantastic. One of my favorite krautrock albums of all time. Another artist you must include in any conversation about krautrock is Klaus Schulze. He was a founding member of Ashra Temple. He also was on the first Tangerine Dream album and had an illustrious and very prolific solo career. He released porno soundtracks like that Body Love album you just saw there. We got multiple copies of that one and many other solo records. He's a pioneer of German electronic music. If you like the ambient instrumental side of synthesizer sounds, then you have to check out his catalog. They are all good records, and I highly recommend each and every one of them. He, in addition to being a solo artist and a member of the groups that I already mentioned, had a record label called Innovative Communication, and he did I don't know how many releases, quite a few releases, again mostly new agey, minimal electronic music. These are all worth checking out. Anything that I see on that label I will grab when we're overseas, because you just don't see that label here in the States very often, and all of these records are worth listening to. All right, a little more Italo disco. You got the Scotch Disco Band. Here's a cool one that we only ever see when we go overseas. Space Art. If you're not familiar with that, please do check it out. Synthy, drum breaks, etc. Steamhammer, banging, hard rocking. Did a lot of records on Brain. As I mentioned, Brain, one of the quintessential krautrock labels. And here's another Steamhammer record for you. Speaking of Brain, sky, 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 sky. Does he talk about anything else? No, not in this video. We are here to show off the cool records that we got overseas, and Brain and Sky are a big part of that story every time. This is another gateway drug into krautrock. If you need a starter kit, if you will, getting one of these compilations with artists like Jane, Can, Omega, which is a Hungarian artist, Kraftwerk, Kran, Nectar, etc., Birth Control. That's a easy way in and an inexpensive way in, because krautrock, this is volume 2 of the same Super Rock Festival series, krautrock can get very expensive very quickly. Ice Bear, I think I mentioned that in the last video when I talked about the Grauzone LP, that I was surprised that Ice Bear was not on. Well, Grauzone was a big part of the Swiss new wave movement, and they are one of the many artists, including Lilliput and Lady Shave and The Sick, on this radical Swiss new wave compilation. If you're not familiar with Lilliput and Kleenex are amazing all-female, kind of slitsy post-punk bands, and they are worth your attention. This particular comp, that Swiss New Wave comp, we only ever see overseas. We only see this Tanz mit dem Herzen, which means Dance with the Heart compilation. We only ever see this overseas as well. Look at that all-star lineup. You got Kraftwerk, Rheingold, Fellfarben, which I didn't get to in this video, but we have tons. Well, not tons. We have some Fellfarben records in the shop, and if you're digging on that German new wave vibe, they are definitely the next one I would recommend checking out. And you get Grauzone on this compilation as well. Not all German bands, obviously. Here we go. We got Tyndall. This is a really great Sky prog record. Definitely heavy on the synthesizers, as many of the Sky records are. Anything by Tyndall is worth checking out. And then another great artist that recorded a fair amount of albums on Sky is this Adalbert von Dyen. All of the album covers are intriguing, like this one is. As you can see, synthesizers everywhere. We've had quite a few large prog and krautrock record collections over the years. There's 4 that I remember very distinctly. We bought the Chicago electronic artist Bill Vermette's record collection, and he collected basically every record that had a synthesizer on it that he could get his hands on from the late 60s into the 80s. That collection was really mind-blowing. We bought a 1,000-piece Kraut and Prague collection in Las Vegas many years ago. We bought a record collection from an artist who we also bought the remainder of the stock on the album by Zenith. Effluvium was the artist. We bought Karl Mack's record collection. He had an amazing collection full of lots of prog and krautrock stuff. Anyway, and another record collection on the south side of Chicago that had a lot of krautrock, and it also had a lot of 80s contemporary R&B. It was like a husband-wife collection, and it was hard 80s R&B and hard kraut on the other side, and that's it. There was nothing, no crossover, nothing in between. It was really awesome. We love buying big record collections of all types, but we're especially fond of prog, psych, and krautrock record collections. We have a lot of experience buying those kinds of collections. So if you have any of that kind of stuff for sale, please come to us first. We will take good care of you. As you can see, we travel thousands of miles to buy these kinds of records in Europe. So of course, we'll travel anywhere in the US to buy a good record collection. We will come to you, we will pay you well, and we will be honest and fair. All right, stay tuned for those records to go up for sale on Instagram in the very near future, and they will also be for sale in our shop in Los Angeles. And I'll be back here with another video sooner than later, I'm sure. Until then, keep it real.